This video is brought to you by viewers like you. Thanks for letting me do this for so long. Exploit is such a dirty word. When applied to video games, it sounds like you're doing something terrible, when in fact, it's one of the most harmless things you can do to a video game. You're not manipulating lines of code or messing around with glitches or even using third-party software to cheat. Exploits are simply a way of using in-game mechanics to gain an advantage that might not have been 100% intended by the developers. What I've noticed is that as games become more and more complex, the more likely they are to be exploitable, which is one of the major upsides to every AAA game becoming these insanely overambitious projects. Can you consider exploits the same as glitches and cheats? I don't know, but let me know your favourite exploit in a comment down below. I guarantee it won't be as cool as mine. I have impeccable taste. In my brain, I need to start with something that clearly shows the difference between a glitch and an exploit, because if I don't, I'm gonna have several hundred comments asking why I didn't talk about a glitch when the title of the video is about fucking exploits. Mario games have had several decades of less than flawless programming for glitches to run amok and make everyone's lives just that little bit more interesting, but I feel like there are significantly less exploits roaming around in these games. Maybe that's just the nature of Mario platforming not really having a metric for progress that can be exploited apart from like coins and stars, but the big main collectible can't exactly be farmed without the use of glitches. However, not only can lives be farmed really easily, but they can be farmed in virtually every Mario platformer. I'm sure we've all done it at some point, especially the later games where they started putting crowns over your lives count if you got enough of them. It's an exploit that's been around since the very first Super Mario Bros, and if you can find a vertical wall where you can condemn a poor, unsuspecting Koopa to a life of endless torture, you're rewarded with a wonderfully low-effort method for getting infinite lives. What I love the most about this kind of exploit are all the different ways you can give yourself infinite lives, because you've got a few variants of Super Mario Bros.' shell trick, like this one in New Super Mario Bros., and 3D versions in 3D Land and 3D World, and an incredibly necessary version in Lost Levels where infinite lives is kind of required sometimes. But you can also get infinite lives in other games by chaining your jumps together, or by infinitely killing enemies with a Koopa shell, or just killing 3 of these guys at the same time in Mario Sunshine for some reason. I don't know. Mind you, for all of you glitch fans out there, there's a few of those that vomit out infinite lives, or at least the capacity to gain infinite lives, so what I'm getting from all of this is that Nintendo figured out really early on that they didn't want their Mario platformers to be too hard. Except for the 3D games, there's not a lot of infinite life exploits in those. Maybe that's why Mario Odyssey doesn't have lives? I feel like, accidentally, I've tracked the progression of game philosophy over the last couple of decades of Mario games. What's this video about again? Despite retaining an obvious exploit that can potentially make their Mario games a tad trivial for difficulty, I'd say that generally speaking, Nintendo patch a lot of things out. You look at most of their remakes, and any interesting exploits or glitches tend to be ironed out either by the developers Nintendo have hired to remake their game, or by Nintendo themselves. Generally, this is a good idea, but at the same time, you can make a strong, convincing argument that the removal of some really good exploits actually makes life just that tiny bit more depressing. Super Smash Bros. Melee contains possibly the single most famous and widely used exploit in the history of video games, and honestly, even just mentioning wave dashing makes me wonder if there's any point to me explaining it, since I reckon most of you know about it already. For those of you who frequently live in caves or under large boulders, wave dashing is a technique from Super Smash Bros. Melee where you air dodge diagonally into the ground after a small jump, which gives you a nice little slide along the ground in that direction and allows you to use a move pretty soon afterwards. Performed quickly enough, and it's a mainstay in Melee's competitive scene for mobility around the stage and spacing to your opponent, and you will pretty much never see a game of Melee at the highest level without it. Well, despite being one of the most important features of competitive Smash Bros, it is not recognized as a deliberately designed mechanic, basically making it a quirk of the physics engine and more of an exploit. The best proof that it wasn't intended is how Nintendo went out of their way to remove it from future Smash Bros games, which obviously did quite a bit of damage for their competitive scenes since the speed of gameplay was significantly slower. The wave dash did return in Smash Ultimate, kind of, but it just wasn't the same after all these years, which makes me think think that maybe we shouldn't be talking about these exploits? I mean, this one didn't exactly get patched in the original game, but Nintendo definitely learned to not do this in future games, despite how fun it is to use. And we all know how much Nintendo hate fun. I've narrowed my search considerably for this video by restricting it to exploits that are still active, because there's no point in telling you how you can break a game's internal structure unless you also possess a time machine that lets you travel to a time before it was patched out. This is stretched to an interesting extreme by a very famous exploit from The Witcher 3, and it's actually so famous that it's basically the only exploit that anyone remembers from that game, including CD Projekt Red. Players quickly found a sensational early exploit that has my preferred flavor of brain-dead execution that splits The Witcher 3's economy wide open, and all you gotta do is murder cows with reckless abandon, and then wait until this sleepy village can grow more of them. And listen, I've been to a farm before, I know cows don't grow on trees, but when you can do some cheeky meditation and respawn a whole new flock of cows, then yeah, they basically grow on trees now. However, CD Projekt Red decided that while this was cool and funny, it was also very unintended and had the obvious potential of ruining the game's economy, so clearly something had to be done. A fix would be easy, surely. You could stop the cows from respawning from meditation, or reduce the chance of these cows dropping their hides to a tiny number, or fuck it, give me some invincible cows. Nah, instead, CD Projekt Red hatched a devious plan that unfolds as soon as you kill just 6 cows, with patch 1.05 making it so the cows are protected by the Bovine Defense Force Initiative. I don't know where this name came from, but I'm happy that this exists, because as soon as you kill too many cows, a level 27 chort spawns very close by and proceeds to demolish any unsuspecting players. This technically counts as CDPR patching this exploit, but there's another layer to all of this. While the spawning of a high-level monster shuts off this exploit to new players that are just starting out, ironically, it creates a whole new exploit for higher-level players. Cow hides are worth a bit, but nowhere near as much as chort hides, and if you fancy doing more meditating, you can just respawn more chorts and farm those instead. Let's just pretend he's a very confused cow. The purpose of this video is to highlight exploits as the happy little accidents they so often become over time, since the very best exploits sometimes go the extra distance and are eventually promoted by the developers to be more of an intended mechanic. You have to really pay attention to what the exploit is doing to the natural flow of the game though, and honestly, if it's not completely breaking everything that the game is trying to do, then why not make it an intended feature later down the road? Nintendo were too cowardly to keep wave dashing as the historically vital feature that it is in Melee, which ends up feeling like a missed opportunity in later Smash Bros. Games. Imagine living in a world where id Software took one look at Quake and how you can shoot a rocket at your feet to go flying off into the distance and thought, how quickly can we remove this obvious mistake? Because there's two ways of going about this. You can either be that boring, responsible developer that acknowledges that an exploit is nothing more than a fancy name for a glitch and do everything that you can to remove all reference to it ever having existed in the first place out of some bizarre sense of embarrassment. Or you can put your big boy trousers on and strap on your testicles and declare to the world that this exploit is here to stay and it's fucking awesome. Rocket jumping in Quake is both really fun to do and also an incredibly important part of speedrunning this game, since there is no better way to turn your character into this ultra mobile pinball and race through Quake in record time. What's more, FPS developers from all over took to implementing rocket jumping in their own games in some capacity, and Valve even made a whole character around it for Team Fortress 2, it's fairly famous. It's such a historic exploit that it has its own Wikipedia page with such tidbits as rocket jumping from standing is impractical in real life and would be certainly fatal if attempted. What do you mean citation needed? Do you really need proof of that? I'll tell you right now, we do not deserve Skyrim. It is my belief that it was not created for our feeble mortal minds to comprehend, and Todd Howard is highly aware of this, which is why he has overexposed the world to Skyrim in a misguided attempt to break down that barrier and cultivate that higher level of understanding. Skyrim has some of the most incredible replayability of any game out there, intended or otherwise. between all the different races you can be with all of the unique buffs and how transformative the glitches are in this game. There are so many of them, and they are all so game-breaking that it can become extremely distracting to continue regular game progression when Skyrim as a structured video game is bleeding out in front of you. A lot of these could be considered exploits since they are abusing game mechanics and a very shaky physics engine, but one of the absolute craziest exploits is both shockingly easy to do and also devastating to every tiny corner of Skyrim. You'd also be reaching way too hard to call it a glitch, so that's a handy bonus. Enchanting is all sorts of busted in Skyrim. It's a mechanic that for sure has some pretty hefty glitches associated with it, but you can also just raw dog the game balance by simply doing some very straightforward enchanting. The key components for this are a full set of alchemy enchanted armor and the ingredients to make a potion of fortify restoration, and by equipping your fancy clothes and making this potion, drinking the potion, unequipping your armor, and then re-equipping it all again, numbers start to go up very quickly, and all of a sudden, oh no. So, okay, big number, but that's just a healing potion. How does that help me? Well, doing this buffs your enchanted armor as well, which means that you can create a new potion that makes you better at enchanting, and I'm sure you can see the stacking effects fall into place. The effects are multiplied together, and as long as you're enchanting during the 30 seconds you've got that alchemy boost, you can create some terrifyingly overpowered enchantments that can boost virtually every metric in the game. You want functionally infinite health, or flawless pickpocketing, or a stick that stuns enemies for 1,000 hours? Yeah, this is how you do all of that, and thanks to one exploit that takes advantage of how stats are multiplied together, Skyrim quickly becomes as trivial as physically possible. I don't even know how to say this number. And yeah, those are my picks for the best exploits in video games. Do you agree, or is there something else you'd have at number 1? Let me know in a comment down below. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you leave a like and hit subscribe for more, and hit that bell for notifications of every new upload. Last week's video was about things that will destroy the video game industry, so make sure you go watch that. And I also want to thank my top supporters on Patreon, including Sarah Malley, the Green Scorpion, and Scott Riker. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.